Howdy ho, folks. Howdy ho, America and points beyond. Who has power and what are they doing with it? Politics is not a natural act.
That's right.
That's right.
I must admit, I never heard that one from you, Jim.
There's so many feisty fighters against the greedheads and boneheads. So grab a libation, join the conversation. It's the personal side of politics, and it is surprisingly tasty. Howdy ho, everybody, and welcome back to the Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour here at the Chat and Chew Cafe. We've got a special one for you today. It is our day after Labor Day show. I came up with that title. I'll take personal responsibility for it. Deanna Zant is with us, as always. Deanna, say hello to the people. You won't know Deanna because
Hey, y'all.
she is the one who is going to be taking your orders. Those of you who are tuning in, viewing, listening, if you've got questions, insights, stories you want to tell, questions you want to ask, Deanna is your entree right here to us. So
That's right.
grab a Labor Day libation of your choice and pull up a chair.
What are you
Join
drinking,
us
Hightower?
Here at the lounge. Well, I am drinking. I'm glad you asked that, Deanna, because I have an answer for it. And that is Allies Beer, Friends and Allies, which is a local brewery here in Austin, Texas. And we have both friends and allies tonight. And that's why I'm sampling this beer for it. We've got beaucoup. Friends and allies on our program tonight to help us parse a surprising story in the labor movement. And it is this: the labor movement is on the move. Completely shocking to the media establishment. Surprising to most people, I think, around the country, because we're told that labor is dead. Labor died in the 90s and in the early 2000s, and they're passe. You know, now we've got Uber, and we've got Lyft, and we got gigs, and we've got Amazon, and we've got Google, and nobody needs labor anymore. Well, it turns out that apparently people disagree with that. For example, if you ask a regular person, how many labor actions have there been this year in the United States of America? Most people would say, well, I haven't really heard of any. The media reports, well, we covered that Amazon thing over there in Alabama. We gave pretty good attention to that, so there's one. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is the official government institution responsible for covering labor reality, reports there have been 8 labor actions in the United States of America so far this year. Well, that's more than none. That's more than one. But the truth is, according to the Cornell Labor Tracker, which is a terrific outfit based at Cornell University, there have been, in fact, 640 labor actions in the United States so far this year. And this is a map indicating this. Those little dots represent several actions within each of those states there. And notice something. They're not just in the upper Midwest, Cleveland, Chicago, Milwaukee, where you expect labor action. They're not just in New York or out in Los Angeles. Particularly active there in the South. There have been more than 100 labor actions in the South, which the media portrays as being virulently anti-union. In fact, unions are on the move. And to help us understand that tonight, and to offer really hope for everybody who is interested in maybe thinking we could take control back of this country, we being the working people of America, not the powers that be, but the powers that ought to be. The ordinary working day people, the consumers, the environmentalists, the farm community, et cetera. Ordinary working day people against the corporate powers. We have that possibility, and labor, once again, is leading the way. And to lead our way tonight, we've got an old pal of mine. Well, he's not old. He's a long-time pal of mine. Larry Cohen, former president of the Communication Workers of America. one of the great and largest unions in the United States today, and also one of the most aggressive organizing unions. And with Larry is going to be Sara Steffens, who is the Secretary Treasurer of the Communication Workers of America. By the way, this union has two national officers. One of them is Sara Steffens, and she's with us tonight. So we're delighted to have both of you. Larry, kick us off here a little bit. What about this attitude that, well, unions are dead and we should just move beyond them?
Well, I think you've already summed it up, and the map from Cornell helps a lot. The reality is, first of all, it's not about unions. It's about working class people, black, brown, and white, organizing where they work, and often with union support. And Sara can run through great stories of CWAers active right now at workplaces like tech workers at the New York Times, 700 of them, bank workers across the country, thousands of them, Google workers who formed their own Alphabet Workers Union tied to CWA, campus workers all over the South, as you said. And then there's many other examples that I know we're going to hear from tonight as well. So it's about workers in their workplace, whether they have a union or not, standing up and saying, hey, you know, we just came through a pandemic. We are powerful. We matter. People clapped for us. They called us essential workers. Well, we have rights too. And so I think that the exciting thing is the United States has lagged in this way for literally decades after leading coming out of World War II up through the 70s, where the U.S. was probably the strongest labor movement in the world. And 30 years later, 40 years later, literally the weakest by most measurements in terms of the percentage of workers that have rights to bargain, rights to negotiate, and many other measurements like their health care, their pensions, their job security. So the bright spot, though, is this worker action, with or without an official union, often backed by a union. Fast food workers have been at this for years with support, for example, from the Service Employees Union, but fighting back for $15 an hour and a union. So this notion that workers can do it for themselves, to feed off of an old rock and roll song, that's really the key here. That's what we see this year, that workers are self-organizing, that is protected under U.S. law. They don't have to have an official union stamp. And that's going on, as you said, all over the country.
Well, Larry was, for years, the organizing director of the CWA, Communication Workers of America, which is no longer, began as a telephone workers union, and now represents what, Larry? I mean, all different kinds of groups.
Less than, I mean, of the 600,000, about 250,000 are telecom. Many of them are tech workers, customer service workers. Again, Sara herself is a great example of a worker who organized on the job at a newspaper, and those papers, journalists together, whether they have a newspaper or not, and my newly adopted dog is playing with one of her toys here, so I have to grab that or you only hear her. Okay. But Sara's own story is a great story of self-organizing and then joining the union, and as you said, now one of the two nationally elected leaders of the 600,000 member CWA.
And Larry was a founder, original organizer of the Jobs with Justice movement, which was not just focused on union workers, but people who wanted, or maybe even didn't know that they wanted to be in a union and to organize. And Larry says something that I think is important and that I hadn't fully understood myself. And that is that unions don't form unions. Workers form unions. They get mad. They get screwed. They get rebellious, and they begin to organize. And at that point, Larry, that's when unions come in and begin to provide structure that amounts to power. And you talk about Sara being in the newspaper world. Let's talk with Sara about that background. I come out of that myself. I was editor of the Texas Observer many years ago, then made the only downward career move you can make from journalism, which was to go into politics. but I survived that too. And I am a member of the AFTRA organization, the American Federation of Television Radio Artists. You didn't know I was an artist, did you, Larry? But I am. Radio artist, and also a member of the Writers Guild in our country. But you helped to start something that is now catching on all across America. Tell us about your jobs. You come out of Minnesota, and then you went to Evergreen.
Evergreen
College.
State College.
Yeah. Which is not a college. Evergreen College is a national park. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. I can't imagine studying there. But anyway, you did. And then you went to work in the media world. Tell us about that. You started where?
Oh, I worked at a number of newspapers before I made it to California, to what was then called the Contra Costa Times and is now the East Bay Times. So my husband was lucky enough to be working as a photojournalist at the San Francisco Chronicle, where they had a union. And I was at a non-union newspaper chain. We got bought out by a company that was really known for being super, super cheap, that they would do everything to cut the staff, drive down costs. And we were really worried about what that meant for our ability to be journalists.
Sure, right. Yeah.
So my daughter, I think, was maybe a year old when I started getting involved in the organizing. And the thing that's really interesting about union organizing is that there are so few opportunities, or there used to be so few opportunities to get involved in that. If you're a private sector worker, it's almost like you're joining this secret club, right? Like I remember reading when I got involved in organizing the National Labor Relations Act and saying, this is amazing. What a wonderful country we live in that gives workers this right, where it's our official policy as a country, right? That we can organize together as workers and sit across the table from the boss as equals. So that's kind of part one of the secret. And then the second part is what you discover pretty quick when you come out as a leader of a union organizing campaign, which is the crazy extent your employer will go to try to stop you from organizing.
Yes.
I was shocked. I wouldn't have believed it, honestly, before I lived through it myself. I very much had an idea that it would be this kind of measured debate, an intellectual, almost parliamentary kind of debate.
Erudite discussion among equals.
Yeah, it's just the boss trying to scare the crap out of everybody for weeks on end, months, if they can delay it for months. So there was that part, which really got me interested in doing everything I could to change labor law in this country. And then the last part of the secret is, I think, what you already talked about, which is that despite all of that, we still win, right? When you organize, when you fight, you win. And there are, all through this pandemic, we've had workers learning that lesson, seeing the power of organizing and how all of a sudden, the employer that never cared what you thought all of a sudden is all ears, right? It happens. It's almost like overnight.
Well, and you mentioned step one, step two, but you skipped another step, which is you get fired. You were a union organizer at the Contra Costa Times.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks after you successfully, you with others, organized a union in that local newspaper chain there, you got dumped.
I did. And I was
2 weeks. I mean, it's not too subtle.
Right. No, it wasn't subtle at all. And I think everybody in the newsroom knew exactly what that was about.
And you were not alone in being fired. There were 2 or 3 others, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they did what they were claiming was an economic layoff, but the choice of the people and the timing made it pretty clear that it was an anti-union statement. Yeah, I mean, it was shocking that they could get away with it. That was under a not great version of the NLRB. And I remember thinking they would just have to give me my job back. And then the other thing was, like, I knew that they didn't want me around. Yeah. So they were trying to get rid of me. So you know what? I'm going to be here every day. Every single bargaining session, I sat at the table across from the employer, and I was there when we finally reached our tentative agreement a year later to shake their hand and say, you know, I never went away. They didn't win. All they did was give me a lot more time to work on union issues.
And that is really, to me, the message of Labor Day and of this in our little gathering here tonight, is that you've got to be tenacious. You know, you're not going to win the first time out. You know, Willie Nelson told me once, he said, the early bird might get the worm, but it's the second mouse that gets the cheese. So you got to hang in there. And that's why you have to have a union, why you have to have a movement, because they can do away with you as an individual. They can do away with a group of you.
That's right.
As individuals, but they cannot do away with the movement, with the idea that you express there, Sara, which is that this is an economic democracy. That's what we're taught.
Got a question here that touching on some of this a little bit that y'all have brought up a couple of times now from the audience. Larry Holman had asked early on why the Department of Labor wouldn't they be aware of all these labor actions, and why aren't they, you know, issuing things? And what's actually wrong with the NLRB, maybe the National Labor Relations Board that you referenced, Sara? What is the Labor Relations Board that's supposed to be working with our unions and working with our workers actually doing? So tell us a little bit about that action.
So, I mean, I think the reason that...
Where to start?
Yeah.
Well, right. You could start with the fact that Scalia's son was the head of the NLRB under former Justice of the Supreme Court, Scalia, right-wing nutball. His son was the head of the NLRB under Trump for a while, so that gives you some idea of their perspective. But go ahead, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's all right. Yeah, I mean, I think people still forget that the reason that we have this whole labor law system, it wasn't just to give something nice to workers. It was for the bosses, because the labor movement organizing was driving them nuts. Wildcat strikes, no rules, do everything you have to do to win your union, win your power in the workplace. I don't think they want to remind people that, or the power of that kind of an action.
Right.
It's just for some decades now, the system has been about how can we pick apart these rights that workers have and tilt the playing field back to corporations. And so, we're seeing and living the results of that right now. But,
go ahead.
The boss is our best organizer, right? And if we don't have a generation of people who've come into the workplace in unions, what we have is a generation of people who know what it's like all too well to work in a place with no union, where they have no rights that are protected. They're completely at will employees. It could be gone tomorrow because the boss didn't like, the way that you looked at him or the way that you tied your shoes.
You said something important in the conversation about that they don't want us to know the power that we have. They don't want us to know the history that we have. And in the the current issue of the September issue of the Hightower Lowdown, our monthly newsletter, I write about the fact that the corporate bosses and most of the politicians and most of the media say, well, unions are kind of un-American, they're kind of Scandinavian, not really American. Well, they seem to overlook something that started at the very start, before there was an America. The Polish craftsman strike of 1619, the very first English settlement in the United States, or what became the United States, of America, when Polish workers were brought over to salvage the economic disaster that the London corporation was having here in this country, because they didn't know what they were doing, and they had a bunch of country gentlemen from England who didn't know anything about work, trying to build an economy. They couldn't do it, but they managed to go off to Poland and find some craft people there who did know how to make soap, how to make tar, how to make all the basics, and how to make wood products, and etc. And those, it originally was 11 Polish workers who were brought over essentially as indentured servants, and salvaged the economy there. But then in 1617, I think it is, that the London Company, along with the King of England, decided, well, all right, we'll let them have we'll let the colony there have its own government. It can have its own legislature, the House of Burgesses, it was called, and so they were going to have an election. But guess who was not invited to be a part of the election? The Polish workers. And to the astonishment, the open-mouthed astonishment of the power establishment there, the Polish workers said, no vote, no work. They had a strike in 1619. And immediately, the London powers knew that they were in a sticky situation, and they gave in. And so workers got the right to vote. So worker action, labor action, has been a part of America before there was an America, and is very much a part of America today. Larry, let me visit with you a little more on what you see that's going on. You're 10 years president of CWA. You've been an agitator in the labor movement forever. You're the chair of the board of Our Revolution, a group that came out of Bernie Sanders' campaign. I'm a part of that outfit as well. You've been there. Do you see? I mean, what is different now? Do you see signs of hope in where we are in the labor movement?
Yeah, so I think two things. So one is, the U.S. had a fine labor law. It got basically totally amended in 1948. Before that, 1 million workers a year were joining unions and had bargaining rights. And then secondly, that today the hope is, we have the best general counsel of the NLRB ever, Jennifer Abruzzo, and she is determined. I'm fighting with my dog about who's on this broadcast. She is determined to bring back the sort of early orientation that the NLRB had, which is that when workers organize, our job is to support them no matter what. And she's already said that. She got on the job a month ago, and 2 weeks later put out an incredible memo telling all the lawyers, 500 of them who work for the board, we're going to prosecute employers like the New York Times who illegally spied on 700 tech workers who have organized a union, walked out on strike to demand recognition, didn't get it, now we're headed to an election. So I think we need to look at American history in terms of, that early period, and then the 1930s, where millions of workers organized, 1 million a year for 10 years, and then the Republican Congress, mostly some Democrats from the South went along with it, basically gutted the law right before I was born. And despite that, in the 1950s and 60s, 1 out of 3 workers had bargaining rights. And then the new law and the way that the courts interpreted it have basically destroyed organizing rights, no matter where you are. Now we have some hope that that the general counsel is going to bring that back. And to the caller who asked the question, the Labor Department tracks the job actions. They're very formal about it. That's why the number is so low. The National Labor Relations Board doesn't do that. Their job is to protect bargaining and organizing rights. To Hightower's question, I think the key is a political movement, and that's what we do in Our Revolution and other groups. But in Our Revolution, to be there, whether it's in Alabama, making the link between the Amazon workers organizing and putting pressure on the political establishment, such as it is, to support those workers. Or the PRO Act, which is a big fight to bring back a much better labor law today. Our Revolution and other groups putting pressure on the Democrats, particularly, who aren't supporting it, to say, wait a minute, if all the Democrats support it, we can change the labor law. So I think there's always been an interaction between the political life in our country and the broad movement we build, that Hightower's been building for decades in Texas and helping us build in our revolution and across the country, the political movement and the workers' movement on the job.
I want to explore something you touched on there, Larry, and that is the New York Times, considered widely the most liberal mainstream newspaper in the country, and yet they took a stand against their own workers. In this case, tech workers and production workers, not the writers. They've had a union for a long time. But tech workers and production workers have filed to have a union. And the New York Times has gone against them. And this relates to the bigger story that both you and Sara have referred to, which is the power of the bosses with the politicians to outlaw unions. And to use tactics that Sara referred to of intimidating workers and et cetera. So, and yet the New York Times got caught in this, didn't they? Tell me that story about the secret memo that was written by a union busting law firm hired by the New York Times that inadvertently ended up in the hands of one of the union organizers at the New York Times.
Yeah, well, I think Sara, can I yield to Sara? She's going to know that story better than I do. So Sara, take it away.
Yeah, that's an amazing story of worker organizing that's going on right now. So you have 600 some workers, tech workers at the New York Times. I saw somebody, one of the listeners commented how badly tech workers need unions. Amen. They wanted to be voluntarily recognized by the management because it's obvious that they have huge, beyond majority support.
Right.
And the New York Times, instead of, they took advantage of the labor law as it stands now and wanted to start arguing about the unit sides instead of letting the workers decide who their community of interest is and what their union is. So they accidentally leaked a memo by one of their union busting firms that they hired, talking about different ways that they could diminish the size of the unit. I just think it's always important to remember the power isn't in the law. We need better laws, right, and we need better enforcement, but the power is in the workers. They were suffering unfair labor practices. They did a walk-off. Union hasn't been recognized yet. They haven't, they just finished hearings to make it to a vote, but they act like a union. They are a union. Management knows that they're there because they walked off and had hundreds and hundreds of workers in tech workers at the New York Times walked out to say, you can't treat us this way. We deserve better. So it's an amazing story, really inspiring to a lot of us, as has been the media organizing, where we've seen hundreds of workers form and form their own unions in the last couple of years. And here in CWA, we are so proud to be the home of the Alphabet Workers Union, the Google workers, upwards of 860 members. They don't have collective bargaining. They're just signing up to be union members and to pay dues to build a better workplace and a better.
Let me toss this in because you tossed out a couple of big numbers there. 650 workers at the New York Times, 800 at Google, and et cetera. And then our viewers and listeners might be thinking, well, wait a minute, why aren't we hearing about this? Aren't these labor actions? Well, yes, they are. But the Bureau of Labor Statistics under Ronald Reagan decreed that it is not a labor action unless more than 1,000 workers are involved in it. So that is why we can put that map up there showing hundreds of labor actions across America. And you've never heard of them. There are actions right in your town. and you've not heard of it. We did the Hightower Lowdown in August on a strike not a strike, a lockout by ExxonMobil, locking out the employees of a Beaumont ExxonMobil refinery. The workers there are not asking for more money. They're not asking for more benefits. They're asking for protection against explosions. Oil and gas tends to explode, in case you heard that. And there have been workers die in that very plant. And so they wanted more protections. But the union is out to bust the steel workers, in this case, union. Not just in the Beaumont plant. This is their largest plant in the United States of America, the largest plant in North America. And if they can bust that union, then they can bust the union clear across the board. So this is a direct labor busting effort. But there are 650 families locked out, meaning they have no job, they have no health care, they have no benefits coming their way. They've been locked out since May the 1st in Beaumont, Texas. Not a word in the media. Not a word in the state media, not a word in the national media about this strike, because it doesn't reach the threshold of 1,000 workers. It's only 650. So there are all these pods of explosions going on across the country. That's both the bad news and the good news. But there's another layer now coming in to the union movement, it seems to me, that I'm impressed with, and that is people who are not into traditional industries, the big, the steel and automobiles and oil and et cetera, but are in a lot of the service sector in particular that are out there. And we've got a couple of people that we want to bring on into our conversation now who come out of that particular movement. There is an astonishing thing. Starbucks, I don't know, larger than which you almost cannot get unless you're Amazon, and they have not a single one of their shops of the, I don't know, is it hundreds, thousands, I guess, of Starbucks shops all across America, and they say, well, we're these are our partners. We don't have employees; we have partners, and we have a culture of appreciation of our partners. Well, some partners are saying, maybe not, and we've got a couple of those partners to join us right now, coming to us from Buffalo, New York. Yes, the home of Buffalo Wings. And the Buffalo football team, I would add. I've been, by the way, to the Anchor Bar in Buffalo, from whence Buffalo Wings come. And we have these two fabulous people who are involved in a unionizing effort there. We've got Jazz BRISACK with us. Hello, Jazz.
Hello, thank you.
There you go. And Michelle EISEN to us.
So
now, tell us what is going on there. Why? All right, you're not a mine worker. You're not deep in the mine. You're not in a hot steel situation. Why do people like you need a union?
Gonna go. I think we've just come to the conclusion, and I hope that this is what this current labor movement in our country is about, is that you don't necessarily need to be in dire straits to realize what unionizing and coming together can do for you and your work environment and your overall well-being. And we have reached that point in this company where we know that they can be doing more for us and are choosing not to. And the only way to make that happen is to come together as a force. There's definitely power in numbers, and there are certainly more of us on our level than there are of them.
Hello.
And this is what needs to happen. It's time for it to happen.
And Jazz, it's all right. Tell us a little bit about what you faced. I mean, how did you? Because I know it's got to be intimidating. You're not high paid. You're not powerful in the community. You don't have politicians courting you, et cetera. So what's involved in trying to convince other workers, enough workers, that 3 Starbucks in Buffalo are petitioning to be a union? What's involved in that?
I mean, I think it's really trying to stand up to the fear of union busting. Starbucks is a company that likes to say that they're very progressive and have a lot of values about equality and supporting Black Lives Matter and supporting the LGBTQ movement, but keep telling us that they're so pro-partner that we don't need a union. And I think there's very few people who really don't want a union. There's a lot of people who are very afraid of voicing support for a union. I will say Buffalo is a great place to do this because there is a lot of community support, and ranging from the community and other unions to politicians, including like the mayoral candidate, India Walton, who is like had us march with her in the Labor Day parade yesterday. So I think there's a lot of support for this organizing, but I think Starbucks has been, flooding our stores with corporate folks, including the president of Starbucks North America on down, to tell us, oh, we want to listen to you now. And I think the real message there is they only want to listen to us when they're scared they're going to have to bargain with us.
Well, good for you. But you're raising something very important, and that is public support for unions. Public support for fairness. Isn't that fundamentally what it comes down to? Justice. Just 2 decades ago, unions did not have a majority support in this country. Less than 50% of the people supported the idea of unions, and now we're at 2/3 of the American people support unions. Basically, the same percentage of people would say that they would join a union if the opportunity was there for them. Get this: 45% of Republicans today support unions. This is not a political danger zone for politicians to get involved in, but the politicians won't move until the people move. And what you're saying is that in communities, and Sara, you can chip in on this strongly because you know this well in the efforts that you've been making, is that the community support has become a new organizing. Well, it's an old organizing tool, but it's particularly poignant now that companies cannot get away with just stiffing people because the people are on the side of the working people, because after all, they are mostly working people.
Yeah, that's so true. I've been thinking a lot about, the early days of the pandemic when, people were so grateful, like you'd be in the grocery store and you want to just hug the cashier, right? Although that's not what anybody wanted at the start of COVID, but that feeling that people had, and for our, for our nurses and our retail workers and our restaurant workers, our Starbucks baristas, right? And so where does all that feeling go? Right? I mean, it shouldn't just go away. We should turn it into support for organizing, because if there's one thing we can do to say thank you, it's to stand with workers like Michelle and Jazz when they're organizing, doing the hard work. It's a lot of work, right? People might want the union, but you have to put in, the boss has unlimited time and energy. The employer, these big corporations can do whatever they want.
Well, staff and money too.
Yeah, and so we
lawyers
need to stand with them and say, okay, we lit candles and we banged pans and we gave hopefully extra big tips. I know I did, but now let's go the extra mile. Let's sign their petitions and stand with them. And if you guys, end up doing leafleting or marching in Buffalo, we would like to be there and stand with you. And I think that's how the public feels right now.
Well, that's where Fight for 15 came from. I mean, probably the most aggressive mobilization movement for workers in the country by the least powerful workers in the country came up, and they could not have done that though they had support of CWA, SEIU, other great unions, they could not have done that except that the people themselves said, that's right. We see ourselves in this fight. And that is so important. And I'm astonished. Well, Larry, let's go back. This is not the first rodeo that we've all been in here with a fight within a community that has not traditionally been organized and has been denied organizational possibilities. You were an initial organizer of the Texas State Employees Union. You came out of state workers union efforts in Philadelphia many moons ago.
New Jersey, yeah.
Yeah, and so you know that, and here's this is my state of Texas, from which I sit right now. Outlaws collective bargaining by state workers, public employees. Yet there was a union formed back in the mid '80s or early '80s that perseveres today. Tell us that story, Larry, because you were right in the middle of it.
Sure, and the fast version of it is, again, that if workers organize, whether it's Starbucks, Texas State Workers, where I came from, State Workers Organizing Committee in New Jersey, if we organize and say to each other, we're in it as long as it takes, and one day longer than the boss is in it, to prevent us from bargaining and having a voice, we can win. And there are many, many inspiring examples of that. The Texas State Employees Union, which I might add Hightower joined, even though he was an elected official in Texas at the time, and he then inspired his whole office to join, knew that in the Constitution of Texas, it's illegal to have bargaining for public workers or state workers in particular. And yet people said, well, so what? We'll organize anyway. We'll fight for better pay. We'll fight for health care, for a decent pension. And here we are 35 years later. They have 10,000 members. And people, come and leave the workforce, and yet they continue to grow and have a voice in so many departments there. And it shows that whether it's at Google, the Alphabet Workers Union, or the Bank Workers Union, and these are CWA things, or the fast food workers, where SEIU, service employees, are the main union, that you can make a difference when you organize. And I think that's what the sisters are showing at Starbucks. One day longer, each day stronger, and as long as it takes. And anywhere in the world, that's what organizing is. The problem here is that we need a much stronger political movement that's focused on those rights.
Right.
So when they organize, it's not just an anecdote, we have a candidate supporting us. It's that there is real backing from, like, the current general counsel, Jennifer Abruzzo of the NLRB. But that's not the norm in this country, as it would be in South Africa or Argentina, or, as you said earlier, anywhere in Europe, let alone Scandinavia, half of Canada. In this country, the norm is you're on your own. And so everybody listening to this, everybody who, like me, is a fan of Hightower, we've got to build that political movement, whether it's our revolution or some other group that says to the Democratic Party or independents, without workers' rights, we have no rights. And I think, that's what we're trying to do in our revolution. And that's what many other allied groups are trying to do as well. We can't leave it up to workers to just do it alone. We have to show that we'll be there in those fights, wherever those fights are, whether it's those oil workers in Texas or the mine workers in Alabama, or the New York Times tech workers in New York and wherever else they are, that wherever they are, we'll be there too.
Well, there's a wonderful aspect of this that I want to highlight here, and that is I'll even call it the entrepreneurial spirit of organizing. You're not just stuck by the old models. And if we were, there would not be a Texas State Employees Union today. There's the old saying, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. I've never known why you would want to skin a cat, but nonetheless. Well, my mother put it to me years ago. She said, two wrongs don't make a right. But I figured out soon that two left turns do. Do I need to pencil that out for you? That we've got to that we can make a difference, and that's what I see happening. That is so exciting. The creativity of ordinary working stiffs in America, saying, "All right, they've got a corner here, but we can find our way around it over there," and that is the spirit. That is the Union spirit from 1619 forward, and that is the spirit of America from the founding. The idea that ordinary people can take on the powers that be and become the powers that be, not without tremendous struggle and pain and blood and death. All of that comes with it, but that throughout those decades we're making great strides.
I've got a
Deanna,
question.
do we have some folks who want to chime in here? Let's hear it.
Yeah, some great stories too. And this resonates really well with me. Jennifer says that my dad worked for Ma Bell back in the 60s through the 80s when Bell got broken up. He was always in the CWA. And I picketed with him when I was a little kid when they struck upstate New York for about 7 months over their contract. I was there too. But this is what's really interesting to me is there is this like generational perception shift. I'm wondering if y'all can talk a little bit about like what are younger people understanding differently about unions and about working together as a union that's different than, say, the last 20 years of youth generations and youth activism. Like what's different about this moment now? And that I'm going to punt out there, Sarah, Michelle, Jazz, anybody, Larry, anybody can answer.
It's always been young workers. That's all I would say. It's always been young workers. It was young auto workers in the 30s. My group with over 1,000 on the organizing committee was young workers in the state of New Jersey. Sarah Story, young worker. The sisters at Starbucks, young workers lead. Everywhere in the world, that's been the story since the beginning of organizing.
I think about back when I was a reporter, a guy I met who was organizing he worked at a gas station and he was organizing his gas station. And he said people would say to him, "This is stupid. Why don't you just go work somewhere else?" And he would say, "Because every place else is exactly like this." Right? I think that's a big part of what it is right now. Every place else, if you don't organize, your chance of getting a union job, just lucking into one is vanishingly small these days. And so if you want dignity at work, a voice on the job, you have to make it.
Yeah, there's Jesse Jackson used to say, we might not all have come over on the same boat, but we're in the same boat now. And that's a powerful political reality right there. And I see it being exercised. I want to ask Jazz one more thing here, and that is that corporations have responded to all of this. The corporate establishment generally, the ideologues and professors and et cetera, by saying, again, well, these are not workers. These are our partners. These are our colleagues. And they're doing things like, I see, where is it here? Some companies in the tech world are offering, instead of higher pay or better conditions, they're offering Zoom-free Fridays. You don't have to do Zoom on Friday. JP Morgan Chase came out and said, we want to see that our workers do not have to work as long on the weekends as they have been working. We've got a company in New York that is saying, well, we're helping soothe the souls of our workers by putting beehives on the top of our buildings. And they get to take some of the honey home. Is any of this working?
Not in my opinion. No, it's not. it's I mean, I don't want to come off and go in a negative way and say it's basically just insulting, but it's insulting. I mean, we're working in the middle of a global pandemic. This isn't even a normal working situation where we're being asked to do what we have to do to produce, to bring in the money for this company. We're doing it in the middle of a global pandemic. So, you know, saying thanks so much for all your hard work. Here's a free subscription to Headspace. So when you're not here, you know, working, you can go home and meditate about it. It's just, it's not working. I think that they think it sounds progressive to be offering these unusual benefits, unusual from maybe what they were used to being offered when they were a young worker. But it's not. It's insulting. I would rather, you know, put our money out there and, you know, let's cut some bonus checks if you're going to try and give us, you know, an incentive. But these really silly, you know, here's your free, you know, premium Spotify account. It's just not. No, it's not working. And if we could go back, if you don't mind, Hightower, to go back to Deanna's question about what's different now and as far as young people are concerned, I think we were watching our fellow coworkers, those people who you spend probably more time with than you spend with your family, struggling to, you know, get through this pandemic, struggling to pay their rent, struggling to put groceries in their fridge. And there wasn't really anybody coming down from the top saying, hey, let's help you out with this.
Yeah.
So if they're not going to help, the only thing we had left to do was help each other, and you know, organizing was the best way to do that. So, you know, it's obviously the very beginning of our fight, but it seems like a really fantastic time. I mean, it was necessitated out of a really terrible thing that's happened, you know, to our world, but it brought us to the point that we needed to be brought to realize that this was what we needed to do. This was the fight that needed to be fought now.
I don't believe it could be. Go ahead, Jazz.
I think I would add, I don't think, like when I was 16 working at Panera's in East Tennessee, I wanted to organize a union, but there was no union I knew that would take that on and no way to go about doing that. And I think for the first time, there's a labor movement, and we're working with Workers United Upstate New York, which is part of SEIU, on organizing the restaurant industry and trying to raise conditions at Starbucks and across an industry that has basically messaged itself as, you know, this isn't a real job. This is a job that we can afford to pay low wages because it's not a career. And we're trying to make the point that for many people, it is a career and it should be a career, a place where people can make a career. Right. But I think it's also partly that there are unions that are now organizing in sectors that are under-organized rather than just lack a desire to organize.
And that sounds like some stuff that you've talked about, Sara, in the past of I like this term, the under-organized, and talking about why things are different in this particular moment. Like, what is different now than 20 years ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's such a good question to sit with. I mean, one thing is that organizing inspires organizing. And you have, I can't even count the number of people who have talked to me about organizing because they were inspired by somebody else's campaign. You know, Michelle and Jazz are inspiring, you know, people at other Starbucks probably right now to say, hey, I could do that too. And when we win these units, even more so. You know, I was saying earlier, it's like a secret club. You know, the more people that get inducted, the harder it is to keep the secret, right? And that's a good thing in this case, the power of organizing.
Actually, to that point, if anybody has some resources that we can post later in the comments, you don't have to answer
Yes.
now, but we'll get back. We have Matt is asking for Florida IT workers, what can we do or join to make a difference?
Code CWA. The campaign to organize digital employees. You can find us on Twitter. It has been growing by leaps and bounds. It is not true that tech workers don't want unions. Tech workers want, like everybody else, they want unions. They just don't want to be fired organizing them. But,
Fantastic.
I've got one more thing to jump in on. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Hightower, but I have to pay the bills.
You're fired. You've interrupted me. But no, to pay the bills, go ahead.
I'm forming a union.
I can't fire you because we don't pay you enough. Okay. Go ahead.
No, we're gonna pay the bills here. First of all, huge shout out to our partners at Free Speech TV.
Yes.
If you're just tuning in now, you can watch this again. First of all, on our Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter pages and accounts. But it'll also be broadcast here on Free Speech TV through regular rotation and available on demand. And if you would like more Hightower in your life,
of course,
you can have that. You can have that.
How, Deanna? Tell us how.
I've got an idea. Oh, there it is. You can join our email list where we will send you weekly updates of everything that's happening in our world and the stuff that we're reading and thinking about, updates from our friends that we've had on the show. You know, when you talked about, for example, community support, we had our previous guest, Eric Hall, who was supporting the Birmingham, Alabama workers, is now running for city council. So he was out there supporting those workers and helping them provide, get the resources that they needed to make it through that organizing effort. And now, is running for office. So we'll keep you updated on all of that stuff. I am done paying the bills and I'm going to drop off and leave it to you, Hightower.
Well, I will just say what a wonderful hour this has been for me. And I thank all of you for what you're doing. And we will put your cosigns up and all the how to find you here and there through the global intergalactic space and et cetera, because we want people to be in touch with you and you to be in touch with them, because that's how we make the difference. And that is what the union movement is all about. Uniting. Let's all do that together. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll be with you again on another
Thank you.
Hightower Chat and Chew. Thank you.
Solidarity.
Bye.
Solidarity, yes. Howard.